Hey, welcome everybody to episode 7 of the Turn and Burn podcast. I am one of the hosts, Jason, with JER Custom Designs and Rotoboss Rotary Attachments, and I am accompanied by Chris Licasio. How you doing, Chris?
All right, buddy. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. I figured this time we'd take care of uh, some rotary stuff this time.
Rotary hijinks.
Yeah, let's see what that gets us up to. But But yeah, so this episode, as some of you guys have already seen, is we're going to cover basically your setup procedures for chuck or roller. Mute that. Sorry. Um, so yeah, we're going to cover basic setup of your rotary devices with Light Burn. I am in no way an expert in this, so if anybody has any inputs, we're always open to it. I mean, believe it or not, I did my first rap last week. I put a post about it. It was like a tribal band around a Yeti cup. Um, and it worked out really good, seamless. Everything kind of came together, so that's pretty cool. So I might end up doing more of those. Kind of like a bug, kind of bit me.
How long did it take you though?
Uh,
What
it was
machine did you do it on?
it was on the Nova 24
Hmm.
and the Talon,
Right.
and after getting everything set up, hey, what's up, Alex? And
Rob.
damn, brain fart. Rob. um,
So you did it on the 24.
awesome. Yep. So I did it on the 24 in the Talon. Of course, obviously setting up the steps and everything, which we'll go over and kind of hopefully do like a half and half episode where we're talking about the chuck and the roller because they're kind of similar but they're different. But anyways, after getting the steps and everything set up, I did the initial design. Used a junk Yeti cup, and everything came together, but the design didn't match on both ends. So I basically had to go in and I copied one section of it, moved it to the front side of the other, and then moved the nodes around to where everything kind of lined up with
Hmm.
the back end of it. And then did the second one. So it was the second time I ever did it, like literally
Yeah.
made the adjustments, did it, and it came out flawless. So I was pretty pleased with that. But
You got to be kind of have a little bit of forethought in the way the graphic is going to line up on the other side. So it takes a little bit. Once you get it down though, it works out.
yeah, let's see. Let's see. Hold on. There it is. So Alex says on the Rotoboss with the Mirror 9. Well, the 360 test is not the test to use. That's a chuck function. It's not really a roller function, and we'll kind of get into that too. It can work, but when you go to do a scale object, it's going to be squished or distorted. Um, the and we'll go through as well. Part of this is how to set up a template and everything to match what Lightburn says it should be. Sometimes you got to tweak it a little bit. Like when I did that wrap I did, Lightburn told me, let's say 276 millimeters. Well, 276 millimeters fell just a little bit too short, so I had to increase the size of my template a little bit to get it to match up.
They're picking on you already.
What's that?
Your internet.
What is it messing up?
No, but cheers to Bob.
Oh, hey, thanks, Bob.
Bob's an awesome dude, man. When he was visiting in town, brought me my
Damn,
Woodford Reserve.
I need visitors like that.
I know, right? One thing that Laser Everything is saying, I think, if I'm not mistaken, they're talking about one of the 360 tests to make sure it not the Light Burn 360 because that we know that's wrong.
Yeah.
But the 360, we want to make sure that it goes a full revolution, and then the circles are ovals. They have to be stretched only because of the warping around. It looks, if you measure it, it's correct. If you did a 3-inch circle, it's 3 inches this way, it's 3 inches that way. If you're correct in your measurements and your steps, but it looks like an egg.
Yeah, I mean the problem with the 360 setup is you're dialing in your steps to make a full rotation, which is not what you want to do. You want to get your scale set up, your 1-to-1, like 1-inch square. You want to get that set up, and then like I was saying, you want to create your template size to make full revolution based on the setup that you just did with your scale setup. Because if you do a 360 setup trying to match your steps to go a full rotation, what happens is when you do a scale setup, it's going to be either squished or elongated because Lightburn doesn't know that you're tricking it to make that full revolution. All it knows is it needs to go X amount of steps. So when you dial it back and try to do a scale setup, it's typically going to be off, and that's where a lot of people are like, well, just go ahead and stretch your image by 5 or 10%, because you're basically making up for that loss because of the 360 test. The 360 test is mainly for chucks, which Lightburn incorporated the test button for that very reason, to do the 360 without having to go through all the stuff we're talking about now.
And those of you who may be Thunder users, that test will not work for you, just so
Nope.
you know.
Yeah, it only works on if you're using a Y-axis laser, which Thunder doesn't use. They use the U-axis or A-axis, whatever you want to call it. So only on the Y-axis machines will that test function work, in my experience. Now, I could be wrong. Now, in the Galvos, it works in the Galvos because, again, that's what it's made for, with a chuck. So it works flawlessly on Galvos of all sorts, fiber, UV, CO2, all that stuff. So it's really easy to set up in Galvo because literally you dial in some steps, you hit test. Nope, that didn't quite make it. Bump it up a little bit, hit test, and that's how you set it up. But a roller is completely different, especially with, like, for Rotoboss, for instance, since ours has a 1-to-1 drive ratio, meaning it basically all the drive line is the same. So you got 40 tooth pulleys, and then you got the motor. So it's essentially a 1-to-1, whereas other devices have like a 20 tooth pulley on the motor and a 40 tooth on the drive wheels, which makes it a 2-to-1 ratio. So it's a little bit different for Rotobosses compared to others. But again, I'm not trying to advertise, but just point that out. Let's see, works on OMTech for Chuck. Yep, because the OMTech uses the Y-axis, and the same thing with Eon. Eon also uses the Y-axis, but they have a relay that switches between rotary and Y. So when you plug in your rotary, it triggers and flips the relay. So now it's driving the rotary instead of the Y-axis.
Yeah,
so
I think Thunder is probably one of the only ones that has a true dedicated separate driver that's plug and play. There's no switching. Plug it in. You can still move your X and Y like it's, like nothing ever happened, but it knows the rotary is there.
My test didn't work. Yeah, AZ. Yeah, the test in Thunders, it doesn't work. It's not. And I think from when I talked to Jason at ISA about a month ago, he was talking about trying to fix that, but there's a lot more involved in it than because of the firmware. They got to get with China and figure out their firmware and to communicate with it and all that stuff. So it may be a function.
So yeah, it's more complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, they with all the updates they come out with, it makes it seem like things are quick and easy, but I mean the changes that they make have been in the books for who knows how long, and it's just they're starting to trickle out, and they just came out with the new update, which I don't have on my version of Lightburn that I'm going to be demoing on, but hopefully everything is fairly similar to where people can follow along. Next show you guys may be at ISA next year for sure.
Yeah.
Might try to go to the Next Level conference. I don't know. I've reached out to them, and for reasons unspoken, I probably won't be going there. But I think that's the next big event. I think like as far as Thunder wise and myself, ISA is the only thing I have planned, and then they have the event in November, which sold out, which is awesome. Hope people get a lot of useful information of that. Private, almost essentially as close to a private
Yeah.
tutoring session that you
Yeah.
can get.
Yeah.
So if you didn't get in, maybe next year will be different. But the whole point of that, like they said, and others have said, is they're trying to keep it personal, and more geared towards individuals instead of the masses. So as things grow, maybe they'll do a bigger and better one next year with more people and
Yeah,
things like
and
that. So
we'll adapt. We'll see how it goes, but the idea is machine time. You
Yep.
know, we want 4 people per machine. We want to be able to answer your questions and dedicate time to you. So having the amount of machines, having the amount of people right there at to help you is huge. And it's a test. It's a pilot. If it works, we've already been discussing using this facility, with small groups of 3, 4, maybe 6 people. Come on down here, and we could do it as well.
Shoot, yeah, we got plenty of room here too.
Yeah.
And 6 lasers. So that's just a quick little BS session, I guess. But we'll go ahead and kick this off because this is I'm gonna try to go through it quick but efficiently, or expeditiously, I guess, to make sure we get it all in the time so we're not wasting anybody's time tonight. So I'll go ahead and bring up Light Burn here, and we'll kind of run through some of the things. Hopefully, can you guys see everything?
It looks good on my side.
Okay, you can see the top part of it, the file, edit, tabs, all that stuff.
Yep.
Because for some reason it's cut off on my StreamYard screen.
Everything I need to see is there. Yes.
All right, so we're going to be setting up a rotary, and I guess the first thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and knock out a roller rotary. So when you're setting up, and Chris, feel free to jump in at any time because I know you have wrong ways of doing this, so I'm sure I'll hear them on the way. But there's 3 ways you can actually get into your rotary settings. One of them being your rotary setup button up here. And then you have a chuck, roller, enable rotary, which in Thunders you don't have to worry about. That can be off or on, it don't matter. And I'm on a dummy computer, on a dummy machine right now, so some things may not come through. I won't be able to go look at settings or anything like that, but I will be able to show you stuff on this. But nonetheless, so for a y-axis machine, obviously you're going to see y-axis highlighted. Thunder, probably 90% of the time you're going to see x-axis. Sometimes you might see a y. But
on A or U.
What's that?
A or U.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on this part right here,
yeah.
It'll say A or Y, so it really don't matter. But if you're running a y-axis machine, you want to make sure your y-axis is selected. So setting up a roller rotary, as you can see when I toggle between them, there is a difference. The only difference really is you're working with steps, an object diameter, and a chuck, and a roller you're working with steps and roller diameter. So just for instance, let's say we're working on a Thunder here. So let's say 4200 would be our steps for rotation. Just an arbitrary number. The manual says 44 to start with, but just for the sake of this, will be 42. And the roller diameter, let's say you're doing a junior, a Rotoboss, Ascend. I'm not sure what the other companies use for their roller diameter, but you would put that roller diameter in there and that would never change. So now that we got this done, object diameter and circumference do not matter. They have no bearing on anything, and Lightburn even put a nice little note in here for us. They're not required. It's just a useful calculator. And this number here is where we'll get to setting up our template to get our 360-degree rotation. So we'll use that as a base number to get that, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So once you go ahead and do this, this is one way to do it. The way I prefer, because it eliminates any confusion with the extra numbers and stuff, is we'll go to, oh crap. I'm not going to be able to show it, I don't think. Yeah,
yes.
I'm on a GRBL, so it's probably not going to give me a rotary option. But anyways, if you come here, the third or fourth gray line down, you're going to see rotary settings, and you're only going to have steps and rotary diameter. That's it. And then, of course, once you're done with that, you actually have to write it to the machine. You'll read it first, obviously, but when you open it up, it's automatically going to read it. So once you make those same changes we made in the rotary setup, you're going to go ahead and hit write. You're going to send it to the machine, and then you'll be good to go. And then I think I'm missing the third one. It's slipping my mind. But anyway, so we'll go with those two for now because that's the most common ones. The rotary setup, and then of course the machine settings. So once we have our baseline numbers in Light Burn, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and create a box. Just drag a box. Doesn't matter what size it is. And then we'll go up here in 25.4 and 25.4. That's going to give us a 1-inch square. You can also go up here in Light Burn and type in 1IN, enter, and it's automatically going to convert it to millimeters if you're in millimeters and you want to do it that way. So now once we got our box, obviously the goal is to get a square, and square by measurement, not necessarily by visual eye, because that's something you may have to alter to get that perspective right. But for the purposes of the setup, we'll create the 1-inch square. You want to make sure you're on fill, especially on a roller, because if you do line, a lot of machines, Thunder's included, if you hit frame or to try to test it, it's going to move really fast. And we have a video on our YouTube, the Rotoboss Rotary Attachments, on how to dial those settings back for your U-axis. Then what I recommend, like say I use a Nova 24, so I use 600 millimeters a second and 13% power with a 0.06.
And you're just testing this on tape, right?
Yeah. So I put 2 layers of masking tape. You can use blue tape or whatever. I don't use blue tape because blue tape takes more power because it's a Teflon coated tape. So to get a mark on it usually takes more power. Whereas masking tape, it turns a nice bright white. It's cheaper and more readily available in most cases in stores.
And it's cheaper.
It's a lot cheaper. And I only put tape where I'm actually going to engrave, and it doesn't matter if I'm doing this or if I'm doing a design. I only put tape where I'm going to engrave to do my test, because there's no sense in wrapping it around the cup. 1 layer is sufficient, but I do 2 just in case. Like, because I've had instances where I do flood fill, or I forget to turn flood fill off, and it just goes back and forth in the same spot a couple times because I get my angle wrong or something. So I always put 2 on there just in case, because if I catch it right off, I can stop it and it won't damage the cup. But the other method to that, like in the video I just did with the wrap, is I did the first one that didn't turn out. I took some black enamel spray painted over it, and then reran it over that spray paint, and it shows through just fine. You can do that over and over and over again. So those are 2 ways you can do a tape test or a test on a cup.
And that's a good point that you just made. I'll interject real quick, is that I see a lot of people say, I just ruined 5 cups. Well, why the hell are you testing on another new one?
Yeah.
Test and make sure you're running right on one that you've already destroyed, or tape it. Or if you tape it and you tape the whole thing, make sure you don't tape the part that rolls, because now you're adding circumference.
And then when you take that tape off, your shape's going to be off.
Right, it's going to be different.
Yeah.
So, things to consider.
So I mean, a lot of people put tape down, and then they'll put metal tape, and then they'll put more tape over top of metal tape, and it's like, and then they wonder why, like if they're doing a wrap, for instance, why it doesn't line up when they take the tape off, because you just took off like a millimeter of tape or a half millimeter of tape, which will deviate the diameter of that cup enough to cause it to be off.
Yep.
What's up, Dale? Sorry, I didn't get to that. So now that we've got our tape set up, we got the laser set up. Now most, at least for mine, there's a couple others that run the same way, but most of the all the Novas, they run with the motor on the left hand side. And then the Odin and the bolts, they run on the right hand side. So depending on which way you have your chuck or your rotary oriented, you're going to toggle your buttons on the left or right. Typically, I use center left or center right, depending on which rotary I'm using or which machine. And then that way I can line up with like a Yeti logo or whatever and have it dead center, and it'll start there, and everything will be lined up. If you're doing a wrap, like I was doing, I used the bottom left, or well, it was bottom right because I was on the chuck. Because wherever you set origin on the laser, that green dot is where it's going to start on the cup. And if you're doing a wrap, I find it easier to start right off the bat. So as soon as you hit start, there's no rotation, there's no movement, it just starts engraving. And that could be the same with the roller too, if you're using something that doesn't have a logo that you're trying to line up with, because and then in that instance, you just use the bottom left, and it'll start right from that spot, and with no extra movements or anything that could cause slipping or movement or anything like that.
And not only that, you want the graphic to come all the way around and stop at your start point.
Yeah.
So, if you did a middle, good luck trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, if there's no logos or anything, it's not that bad. But again, with a roller, you run the risk of it slipping because of the rapid movements, unless you go through and lower those settings to where it doesn't make those rapid accelerations and stuff, which usually cause it to slip. So once we got our origin set, so we're doing a roller, so I'm going to set it up on the left center because that's typically how I do it. And then on the laser, you're going to actually, once you get it positioned over the cup where you want to hit origin on the laser. That way it knows where it's starting. The other critical part is this right here. You cannot use absolute coordinates or a camera on the rotary, because the camera uses absolute coordinates. So a lot of people, you'll see an error message saying something ab chord or something like that exceeds, or
it'll exceed the bounds, correct?
Yeah. So current position or user origin, I use current position. Some will argue user origin, doesn't really matter.
I will argue.
I know you will. That's why I said it. I cut you off at the pass. But the main thing is, no matter which one of these you use, make sure you set the origin with the button on the laser when you get it positioned where you want it. So what's going on, Frank? So yeah, so now that we got that set up, now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and send it. I don't have that function on here because, again, it's a dummy setup, but you'll usually have a send button over here where it'll send it to the laser. That's another important thing to take note of, is all lasers don't function, or maybe they function sometimes by starting from Light Burn. But the best thing to do is send it, because you send it as a complete packet. So one, it gets you in the habit of doing that, because when you're doing a design, if for some reason you're able to start from Light Burn, it buffers the information to the rotary as it goes. So if there's any communication lost or interruption between the computer and the laser, your file is done. It'll usually stop, or it'll just sit in one place and start engraving the same spot over and over again. It can do some crazy stuff. So it's best to send it. That way the laser has all the information it needs. So if something happens with your computer, it's not going to affect what you're doing on the laser.
Yeah, if you're of the flavor of I have to hit start from Light Burn, then hit shift, and that will send the entire file. It adds an extra line of code saying when you receive all the information, start the file.
Yeah.
So you could always do that, but we're working with rotary and lots of things can go wrong. So go over to your machine, check it out, make sure everything's set up, make sure you're not going to hit your towers on your rotary.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always, and two, I mean, I don't know how most people have their setup. I mean, I have 7 different lasers that I run off of one computer, and 2 of them are like halfway across the room or more. So it's better just to send it. I can see what it shows up on the screen, make sure it's oriented right, make sure, because a lot of times you'll send it. Like I've made this mistake where I'll go in here and let's say I ran a fiber prior. A lot of times when you open up, it'll still have crosshatch. And if you're going to the laser after you hit send, it should take maybe 10, 15 seconds to send the file. If it takes longer than that, usually it's because it's trying to crosshatch, or let's say you did a ramp, you added a ramp to it. It's trying to calculate and send all that data to the laser. So that kind of keys me like, oh crap, something's wrong.
I will say that I want to give Lightburn some props here because as of late, probably the last couple of versions, their device switching has gotten far more intelligent. It is switching libraries. It is remembering palette color settings. So yeah, they're getting much better. So this doesn't happen, but it's always good to check.
Yeah, and that's just my 2 cents on that. That's how I like to do it. Just, well, one, because that's how it works, and two, it, like if something comes up like that that's out of the ordinary, it should trigger you to be like, okay, well, something's not right. But anyway, so now that we've sent this file to the laser, we'll go to the laser, theoretically, or in space, in your minds. Go ahead, I usually hit origin again. I hit file enter. I know you don't have to do that because the file that you just recently sent to the laser is what it's going to engrave. But I do it anyways because it pulls up the picture of whatever I'm doing. So it's just an extra step to verify that it's not backwards, because I do run several different lasers, mainly Thunder, but I have some fibers and stuff like that. Probably it's not as prevalent as it was before the changes Lightburn made, but sometimes it still affects when you switch between them. So just checking that out is really good to do. So once we got all that set up, we're going to go ahead and engrave this. So you'll hit start on the laser, you'll let it run through its setup, and then let's say you go and you do your test square. Yeah, right there. And let's say the square comes out elongated, right? So if your steps, if it comes out elongated, so it's bigger than 1 inch, then you want to go back into your rotary setup and make your changes here. So if it's too big, you want to lower your steps. So let's take it down to 3,500, right? We'll go ahead and we'll rerun that file. Well, this time your file is a little bit squished. So it's a little bit smaller than 1 inch. So we started at 43, we went to 45. So now let's just, for sake of this video or this instance, and this works the same with the chuck too. So this is kind of plays in both parts except for the adjustments here. It's still the same thing, your steps per rotation you're trying to mess with. But so let's say 3950. So let's split the difference. We do it again and we get a perfect square. All right, so that becomes your baseline number. And at least for Rotoboss rotaries, that'll get you basically from a shot glass to a 30-ounce cup without having to do really any changes, unless the design specifically needs to be a specific size, because it will deviate slightly, like a millimeter or so. But by the eye, it's typically not noticeable, especially if you're doing like words or letters or something like that. But if you're doing like a square or circle, it may be enough that you need to make minor changes to it. But for this instance, now we've got our perfect square. and we're at 3950, and the roller diameter is 56 millimeters. So now that we got that done, we're going to go ahead and if I'm going too quick or anything, just let me know.
I do want to preface: nobody used those settings. Those are
Yeah.
these are all imaginary. Don't pause it and say, "I gotta write that down." These are imaginary numbers.
Yep. So yeah, it's not. These are not true to fact numbers. So don't take it as such. So now that we got our steps set up, now what we're gonna do is let's say our cup is 222 millimeters top to bottom, and then in here it says our circumference should be 157. So what we want to do is go up here to the height and type up 157. With that 157, that should get us all the way around. But now that we have that, we can do one more test, essentially your 360 test, but you're not actually engraving anything. You'll take your cup, and with that same tape on there that you had from the test, go ahead at the red dot pointer, go ahead and put a Sharpie as thin as you can make it right at the dot. And then what we'll do is we'll take this and send it to the laser and do a frame. Now when you do the frame, it should go and come back to that spot. But if it's a little bit short, you increase your size a little bit by a millimeter or two, and then send it to the machine, reframe it until those dots or that line hits the dots on both sides. And now you've got a template that you can now throw your design into. And I don't have anything ready to throw in here, but you can do whatever as long as you keep it inside these bounds. Now, another neat feature that Light Burn has is the taper warp. I don't know if any of you guys have seen this before, but with this, you can actually account for the taper of the glass. That way, your circles at the top are circles, and then your circles at the bottom are ovals. This here corrects for that. And depending on how you have it oriented, so we're to the left, so I want to orient this to the left. Our length of the cup is 165.486. And let's say the bottom diameter is 70 and the top is 101 for like a 30-ounce cup.
So I haven't used this yet.
No.
Explain to me the object. Was it the top, the left? So what do you mean the left?
Here, let me get. Alex said, "How do you account for the curve of the tumbler when you're measuring from the perfect square?" Well, you just use like our rotaries come with a tape measure, and you can use the 1 inch, like 1 to 2 inches of it, and that's how you would get that. And like I said, perspective wise, it may not look like a square, but when you measure it, it is, and that's the important part. If you need to add perspective to it, that's where you'll come in here and you'll make your design just a tad bit taller on the y-axis, and that way it'll come out a little bit bigger and account for that and make it look more round. Because if you're trying to do a 3-inch design on a 20-ounce tumbler, it's going to look like 2 1/4, 2.5 inches visually. And that's why I try not to go over 2.5 inches on a 20-ounce and 3.5 on a 30-ounce because of that.
So the funny thing, I'm sitting here listening to all this because some of the stuff I don't do and I've never done. I'm very simplistic, especially in the way that I teach people. And I literally will take that tape measure that you give so graciously, and I will measure out my 3 inches, and I start in the middle of my graphic, and I will frame it, and I mark. If I want it to be 3 inches wide, I mark my 0 and I mark my 3. And when I frame, if it doesn't hit those two parts, I need to add to my graphic.
Yep.
I know I have my steps per rotation correct for what I'm normally doing because you've given them to me with my rotary.
Yep.
So I know I'm somewhat accurate for my normal stuff. You know, a 2 to 4 inch graphic on a tumbler, I should be spot on, maybe with a little fudging of my graphic.
Yep. And that's why no matter what I'm doing, whether it's 1 cup or 100 cups, I'll always do a first test on the graphic, no matter what.
So you mark it like that?
No, I do the design and I'll measure it. So if it's supposed to be 3 inches, I'll do it and then I'll measure it. If it's off a little bit, I'll raise and lower it depending on if it's more than 3 inches or less than 3 inches or whatever.
Got it.
That's how I do it. But you know, like Chris said, I mean, that's not a bad way to test it to make sure it's going to go, because you can hit frame and you can go from 0 to 3 and it should hit 0 and 3 on both
yeah, I just slow
rotations.
my frame down enough so it doesn't spin the crap out of the cup.
Yep.
And it should, you know, I use either a pencil, something that's going to come off easy.
Yep.
You know, actually, if you're using denatured alcohol, even a permanent marker will come off. But you know, I mark my 0, mark 3, and when I frame, it should slowly cross over my little hatch marks.
Yep.
And I'm good.
And that's nothing wrong with doing that at all.
It's worked for a while.
Yeah, I mean it does. I mean there's no wrong way to do this. It's just I have my ways, Chris has his ways, other people may have a combination. But back to Chris's question. So with the taper warp, because before taper warp, and we're kind of getting off topic here a little bit, but before taper warp, you used to have warp selection, and that was it, which I can't. It won't let me select.
Actually, before that wasn't even available.
Well, no. Usually I had to do it in Corel and then import it that way.
Right, exactly.
But they added the warping tool, which is right here, which I can't select because I'm not on an actual machine. And then they also have the deform, which is 16 points, so you can kind of skew it all kinds of different ways. But the 4 point is basically what the taper warp is doing now.
Select your graphic and it'll pop up.
So, oh yeah, that might have been 2. So go back to this. We're left. We're doing a 30-ounce cup, so 101. Length 165.4. Oops, I'm dyslexic. 486. And then the bottom is like 70. So now if you pay attention to the square, you're going to see when I hit OK. Oh, shoot. Help if I selected it. Dummy. All right.
I mean, but laser everything. So, I mean, that's all math, you know. The only thing that matters is, does it look right on the cup?
Yeah.
You know, does it look stretched? Yeah, there's a taper. There you go.
You see the taper going into it now as I'm dialing in these numbers.
I haven't even messed with it that much to even see it do it live like that. So
yeah. So now you're accounting for the taper of the cup, and what that's gonna it's gonna look it's gonna look really, really weird, because you're gonna see just the corner of the engraving starting, because normally you're used to seeing the whole thing start at once. You're just going to see a little spot of it, and it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. It's going to look really funny, but when it comes out, it actually works. And always, and a way to double check this is if you have a large taper at the mouth, it should always be tapered narrower at the mouth than at the base. And that's what's going to make it look weird when it's engraving, because it's going to start engraving down here towards the base of it first, and then it'll gradually start doing the rest of it as it comes up. And the same here, it'll taper off into just nothing. But once it's done, it actually comes out and it looks right. So that's just an added bonus, I guess, for this segment.
I mean, that's great for pint glasses. That's phenomenal.
Yeah. I mean, it works really good for your standard tumblers and stuff too. So let's see if we can see any questions. Actually, hold on a sec.
So the biggest reason for the taper is when you have something that has the taper to it and an angle. So Yeti 20 ounces, a standard glass, pint glass that has the taper to it, where you would have your beautiful circle at the top of it because it's wider and you're spinning the larger part. But as it gets down to the taper part, it starts to shrink it, and now you have an egg. The taper is compensating for that V shape.
Yep. Let's see. So Bob, the adjustments you're talking about is with the changing height measurements, not with changing your steps, correct? Yes. Like I said, once you get your scale set up, the 1-to-1 or 2-to-2, whatever you want to do, it doesn't matter. As long as you get the steps to get that. You're adjusting the size of the template to make that 360 degrees. You're not tricking the system into making it do X amount of steps to get there. That way, when you engrave it, all your scale items, your little circles and squares and all that stuff, they come out as circles and squares as you engrave it. Because otherwise, normally you'll see that circles and squares are squished a little bit when you're doing it with the 360 setup versus doing it at scale and then adjusting your template to accommodate. And like I said, I'm not an expert at this. I've only literally done it like 2 or 3 times, but Katie Devlin is really good at it. Robert Kofed has some good videos on doing stuff like this, and a couple other people as well. So those are the people I would turn to if you have questions. I'll help you. I'm sure Chris will help you. What's up?
I've got a question. So serious question. This is for a standard graphic, or is this for figuring out what your total, if you wanted to do a wrap?
It works for everything. It works for the wrap. I mean, the wrap is not as critical, but if you have shapes that are supposed to be squares or circles or something like that, that's where, like Katie, she has a video on doing that, or the one she did in LBX, she had that display cup where all the circles were perfect at the top, but as you got closer to the bottom, they started getting narrower and narrower and narrower. Right. And that's where the taper warp will come in to correct for that.
Right.
But
the only reason I'm asking that is because, like, if we made a perfect 1-inch square, it's going to work in that 1 inch. And this is something that I've tested over and over again, and I would like to revisit it again because I'd like you to test it. But because there's a gear reduction, because we're working with gears, belts, motors, and all of this other jazz, that the variation of sizing gets progressively worse as we spin all the way around.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
I think so, if I understand what you're saying.
So it may be 1 inch, and we are tuning it in for that area. But if we made a graphic that was the complete circumference of the cup, it would not match. That's something for a later date, but I want you to.
We can probably address that in another podcast or something. If you want to jot that down for future. But if you notice, I did the taper warp on a 1-inch square, and it only changed it by 2 millimeters.
Right.
So you're not something that small on a full size cup. If you did it normal, you're not going to really even see that.
Right.
You might, but other people won't. I mean, you'll know it's there obviously because you did it, but it's not going to be enough by the eye to notice that much of a difference.
No, and if you
hey, speaking of Katie,
there she is. We just mentioned you. Your ears must have been burning. Yeah, if you got customers that are measuring that shit.
Yeah, I mean, most people I do stuff for, like, I've given free stuff away or free jobs away because I'm not happy with it, and they're like, "Oh man, it's great, I love it," and it's like, "Well, I'm not happy with it." So, but because most of the time they're not going to know, they're just going to be tickled that they got something that looks nice.
Right.
So.
Exactly, Katie.
Then you need new customers. So okay, so now that we've kind of covered the rotary or the roller part of this, we'll go ahead and do the chuck, and then we'll answer questions, take questions, whatever. that come up. So if anybody has any questions, go ahead and let us know. I'll flag them, and then we'll come back to them as we go. So now with the chuck is pretty much the same thing, but the only difference is the only place to make changes is going to be in your rotary setup, because on the machine settings, it doesn't give you the option of a chuck or a roller. It just assumes roller, I guess. So in this instance, you would select chuck. And to touch back on what we talked about earlier, Y-axis machines, this test button works most of the time. I know sometimes it don't, and that's because it's running on a Y-axis. Thunders, you cannot use this test button or you'll crash your head into the front of the machine. So just be aware of that. And if there's any videos out there for me or anybody else, I'm going to correct mine. Hopefully other people will correct theirs, because that was something that was kind of unknown at the time, that it would do that.
Mm-hmm.
And now that we know that it does that, we need to make changes for that. So
I think I have one out there that's very old.
yeah. So I'll be making a correction to mine, and hopefully others will too, to make sure everybody's up to date on the information that they're getting. So in this instance, we're going to go ahead and do the chuck. And like I said, a lot of what we just talked about in the first part of the video, minus the setup part, is exactly the same for chuck as far as setting up your 1-inch and all that stuff. And I'll try to segment this into the gantry and galvo, because this kind of branches into both more than a roller does. So with the chuck, let's say you're running the bolt, the Thunderbolt. The object diameter, let's say we're doing a 30-ounce cup, so it's 101 millimeters, and steps for rotation are 8,200. And the 8,200 for Thunder lasers for the Talon is pretty much across the board. Your machine might deviate slightly, like 100 or 200 maybe, but generally speaking, from feedback and everything, 8,200 has pretty much been spot on for most people. So 8,200 is your steps for rotation. And then, like I said, we're doing a 30-ounce cup with 101 millimeters, and then it gives you your circumference. Again, this is for your template. It's information to put into your template to get that size to make that whole 360-degree rotation. The key to a chuck, unlike a roller, is you have to know the object diameter as close as you possibly can to the actual size. Mm-hmm. Like if we put in 100 on a 30-ounce cup, it's still going to engrave okay, or 102, it's still probably going to engrave okay, but your template size is going to be probably a little bit different. But you got to test that anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So for the sake of this, we'll leave it at 101 for a 30-ounce cup. And you can do this test on any cup for any roller. What's up?
I'm just laughing at laser everything.
Whipping all over the place. I have a video, actually, let me see if I can grab it real quick and throw it in the link while we're talking, on how to set up your...
Can you pull up the laser settings for DSP? The machine settings real quick?
I can try. Like I said, I'm on a GRBL,
yeah,
so it doesn't...
It should still be the first one. It's literally the first field as you pull up laser settings, laser machine settings.
Okay, let me get this video real quick. Taper.
We could have actually done a roller episode and a chuck episode.
Yeah, and we can probably readdress that with if anybody has any questions or specifics that we can circle back to on. I'm just trying to find it.
On the DSP, on a standard Ruida controller, you should be able to hit the speed button on the controller and lower that down so it'll frame slowly.
All right.
But the initial move from origin point to start point is your idle speed. And if you don't change that, it's going to move at 300 millimeters per second and just stop.
All right. So I added the link to my video for slowing down the speeds in your vendor settings, and I will preface that with, be very careful what you mess with in vendor settings.
The one that I'm talking about, you don't have to. I mean, you can change that.
Yeah. So if we go to machine settings, let's see here.
And it should be your first. Yeah.
Yeah. See, I don't have any of that.
Yeah, the first setting, it should be an idle speed.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah,
no.
that's still not correct. Not for, at least for people on this video for Ruida. The very first setting is an idle speed, and that literally will be from your origin to your start position. And usually you want to get there quick. If you're on flat work, you want it to go from here to there as fast as possible. But on rotary, you don't want that. You want it to slowly move to your start point, so you don't. I mean, there was a time where I remember on a shitty rotary, not one of yours,
it'd fling it off.
it literally would fling it off. I mean, that bitch was spinning and it would roll. I mean, it had inertia. I mean, it was gone.
Yeah, so the settings he's talking about, like I said, I put the link to the video that walks you through how to do that, so we won't get into that on this video. We'll get back into the chuck here, and then we can kind of BS a little bit afterwards. So we want to go ahead and select chuck. Again, we're on a bolt, so I want to do 8200 for steps, and then the object diameter is 101. Dang it. Come on. And that gives us our circumference for our template later. And if you're on a y-axis machine, you can use the test function, or if you're on a galvo, you can use the test function. And again, you make your mark at your red dot, and then you want to see it come to the red dot, to that mark again, and then back to the mark again. If it's a little bit off, then you can raise or lower your steps until it matches. And then once it matches, that's your steps. But this setup here is for the bolt and basically all the Thunder lasers. And this is like spot on. This is where you need to be, plus or minus maybe, depending on your machine. But that's where you want to be. And then when you do that, you want to go ahead and hit OK. And then we're back to the square, doing the same exact thing. We're going to do our test. If it's a little bit too big, we're going to dial those steps back. If it's too small, we're going to raise them up a little bit. So like I said, I don't want to recap on a lot of the stuff we talked about, because like I said, a lot of it pertains to this as well. The only difference is the object diameter is paramount when you're using a chuck, because once you get your steps set up, Light Burn automatically calculate. Let's say we're doing a 20 ounce and it's 88 millimeters. Light Burn is already accounting for all that, makes the corrections to the file, so you don't have to do anything to the steps or anything like that. So knowing the
There's a whole slew of other issues when working on the galvo, like split sizes and overlap, and
yeah, on the galvo, it's and I wish I had something better than what I'm using now for a dummy. But when you're using a galvo, like for me, I don't do split marking. I'll run it like I'm running a gantry. So usually mine, I'll run it like 0.02, 0.03. And then my split size will be 0.6 of a millimeter more than that. So it'll be 0.026 or 0.036. And then that will give you don't have to put any overlap in. You don't have to put any corrections in or anything. It's just, when it goes, it's line by line. So that way you don't get those dark lines in your engraving when you're engraving with it.
Yeah, but just tell them how long that takes.
It does take longer. I mean, it's not
the right way to do it though. Until somebody figures out how to run the rotary on the galvos.
I mean, you can dial it in,
right?
But the problem with that is, what I've found is it's not consistent between materials or different types of cups and things like that, because the powder coating and things like that, when you do it line by line, it's dedicating the line each time. It's not it's not blowing through 5 millimeters rotating and blowing through 5 more millimeters rotating and so on. It's dedicating each engrave to a set or a step, basically. It takes about the same time as a gantry, to be honest. Maybe a little bit more, because you're running on such a fine line. but that's where your speed and power come in as well. So there's ways to mess around with it. The best way and the easiest way for me is just set my line interval and then go point 0.006 above that. So like I said, 0.02 would be 0.026 for my split size, no overlap or anything. And that usually gives me a nice, clean, consistent engraving all the way around. You are sacrificing a little bit of time, but the quality is going to be so much better, especially on a UV or even a CO2 galvo. Fiber, it really don't care. I don't use a fiber for rotary engraving anyways, just because, especially on a coated cup, because the consistency is just not there. And like if the coating is different thicknesses around the cup, you might engrave perfectly, then you might not engrave enough, and then other areas you might engrave too much and actually etch the metal. So I don't even mess with it on fiber myself. But yeah, so that's in a nutshell, that's the basic setup for the roller and chuck. They're similar in some ways on how to set them up, but they're different also in other ways. And like I said, we can dedicate a show just to doing one or the other and answering questions or whatever. I just wanted to give a brief overview on how to set it up, and this should work with any rotary you're using, whether it's a Rotoboss or other brands. You just need to obviously.
There's other
What's that?
brands. There's other brands.
Sort of. But you just need to make sure that you know their rotary diameter for roller and so on and so forth. The chuck part of it is pretty much the same across the board, whether you're using a D80, D90, the Talon, and whatever else is out there. So it's pretty much the same setup for those, but the roller is a little bit different depending on the manufacturer and how they have the gearing set up and the wheel diameter and all that stuff. So, but
the one thing that is for sure is something that you can measure, which is the wheel. The rest of it you can figure out.
Yep. It could be a little bit frustrating at times, starting out, kind of get intimidated because you're new to it and things like that. But the biggest thing is go through the trials and tribulations of your initial setup, get that stuff straightened out, and then after that, it's pretty much just turn and burn. So,
was that a pun intended?
Pun intended. So hopefully this video has helped some people. I'm always available to help out. If you're wanting training, I'll do training with you. I'm sure Chris, they do it as well with Thunder. And there's other people out there that'll do training with you. If you just have a couple questions or something that we can answer for you, I'm always happy to answer the phone or messages as I see them or as they come up. So if you have any questions or problems, just let one of us know, and we can get you straightened out. We're looking.
Concern today?
What's that?
Questions, comments, concerns today?
Yeah, I don't see too many.
Spent a lot of time talking today instead of letting these people chat.
Yeah, if anybody in here has any questions, I can go for a while longer. I'm not.
We know.
And it's a Wednesday, so I don't think there's any other. We're not interfering with Alex's stuff on Tuesdays. So we got some time. We got one here. So we're doing full seamless wraps. If your seams don't meet, just extend the design. Okay, so with this, I'm gonna do a video on it. I'm sure, like I said, Katie has videos on this. But like I did a tribal band on a cup, and the opposite ends of the band weren't the same.
That was graphic prep though.
Oh yeah, this is talking about graphics. Anyways, okay, so
yours was a graphic prep, so
I was trying to get the nodes to line up to where both ends match when they come together. But as far as what Dale's asking, he's asking about 5 millimeters short. You'd extend the design by 5 millimeters, correct?
Yeah,
that's the proper.
Around.
That's the proper way to do it. That way you're keeping your scale, and you're also making the full wrap. So yes, extending how many ever millimeters it is. Yes, extending it there, doing another quick test, and then tweaking it ever so slightly to get it right. I mean, it took me like 5 minutes to do a couple tests, and then I did one design, and even in the video I showed it. I did the first design, didn't quite line up. I did some tweaking, did the next design, and it lined up perfectly. And that's where having your steps and everything dialed in, having your template set up. The template took me like 30 minutes, but once you have it done, it's done. You can save it as 30-ounce cup template or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you can just use that again next time you do a 30-ounce cup and just throw your design, your new design inside that template, and you should be good to go. Okay, so that's what he did, and it finally came out. That's good. Yeah, I mean, it takes some time to set up, but don't get discouraged. Don't get mad. It's just you have to do it. Like myself and Chris, I know for myself, I don't spend a lot of time doing that stuff anymore because I've done it so much that it's just kind of intuitive, I guess, to what needs to be done to make the changes. And eventually, you can get there as well. But you have to go through those steps. Like I know it's easy to pop a question on Facebook and get like immediate answers, but if you don't actually do it and try it and test and fail, you're not gonna learn. You're not gonna retain that,
You
and
don't
you're
know
not.
why
Yeah,
it's doing things.
exactly. You're just gonna do it because someone said to do it. If it doesn't work, you're not gonna know why or how to fix it. But if you go through the steps, learn, fail, and progress and grow, you'll get to the point where a lot of us are that have been doing this a while, and you kind of guess and get really close, and things just kind of go a little bit quicker. Yeah, Stanley Prince logo and odd spots. Yeah, they do, and then their little handle things. Yeah, tape. Dale says, I don't know about tape. Less tape the better.
Well, and to Katie's point, design your graphic without even considering that logo, and you put a piece of air conditioner tape, the metal backed aluminum tape, right over that logo, and let it engrave over it. Then you don't have to include that in your design. Then you don't have to worry about having it screw up and missing or hitting the logo.
Yeah, I know Katie designs her stuff around the logo. Like she places her stuff around the logo so she don't have to use tape. At least I know she does that a lot. A lot of people will use the tape and cut out the tape in the shape and then put it over it. But that's where your starting point comes in. So if you have a design that you want to miss the logo, you start on the edge of the logo, go around, and then at the end of the logo have that cutout for the logo so it doesn't engrave the actual logo itself. And again, I've seen a ton of stuff that Katie does. She covers a lot of that stuff really well. But yeah, just yep. I like to know exactly where it is or what is there. Yep.
It's under the tape, Katie.
Yeah. Well, the thing with that is if you do the tape, then basically your design is cut off at the tape. Whereas the way I've seen, what's up, Alicia? What I've seen with Katie is she physically designs that shape into her design, so that way she can design around it and not lose any of her design in it itself. Or worst case,
he's got more time. I don't have time to fuck with that shit. No way.
And that's why I don't like wraps. If it's a polar camel, it don't have no logos, whatever. Like doing that tribal band, doing that I did. I mean, that was, it was fun, but it took a lot of time, and that was just for a small band around the cup. I mean, I can only imagine designing a whole cup and making sure everything comes together, especially for seamless. And I know Katie again, say her name a lot, but she brought up when we talked to her a couple episodes back about making sure that your design doesn't come together. It more kind of overlaps, so you're filling the voids instead of trying to match points together. So you can still get a seamless design per se by doing that without having to have to worry about matching up the points.
So stupid things that I do, which I fucked up on this one, but I'll add a line to it so that when it does actually hit correctly, I can stretch this 0.5, but when it does line up correctly, I don't have anything to worry about.
Because it just looks like part of the design.
Right. It's part of the design. If it's off a little bit, nobody would notice except for me. Like, oh, that's the way it's supposed to be. No, it's not.
Yeah, like I said, a lot of times the customers ain't gonna know. Like,
no, I probably should have framed it and checked my marks, but I didn't.
Yep. And I did that too. Somebody wanted a Stanley Cup, so they got a black Stanley Cup and put everybody's names around it. And when I did it, there was a gap at the end because I didn't do what you're talking about and test it fully. I was in a hurry because they wanted it quick and whatnot. So I had like a gap of about 5 millimeters or so more than what the normal spacing was around the rest of the cup. All right, Dale. Thanks for joining. We'll see you next time. So yeah, there's multiple ways to do it. Like I said, just try, learn, fail, and just keep going at it. If you're using cups, I use one cup for all my tests, and I just paint over it. I mean, it's simple. You put a couple spritzes of paint to cover the metal or the mess or the previous design, and then just engrave right over it. That's the simplest way to do it. It's the cheapest way to do it. And if you failed on one cup, please don't keep trying on more cups.
That's
just
$40 each Stanley.
Yeah.
What?
And I've seen that a lot. I don't know the context of that necessarily because most of the time people don't put the context in there. Like, why did it fail, or did they find out why it failed, or did they just try it again because they thought they might get it? But nonetheless, I have one of every cup that I do that is specifically to do tests on. And if I get one-offs or someone, like I got a stack full of Yetis at the shop that I got to do, I'll do a tape test on it first, make sure everything's set, and then I'll do the run. If the tape test isn't right, I fix it before I move on to the run. Especially like this lady brought me these custom teal and gray Stanleys. Like they custom ordered them in that color, and they only had like 6 of them.
No pressure.
And I'm like, oh shit. So it's gonna be taxing. That's where you kind of pick your battles. Like I'm not afraid to take anything. I just make sure the customers are well aware of the possible outcome and what could happen. And I have them sign a piece of paper saying that they understand that things could go wrong. We're not liable. And it's up to you how you want to handle that, whether you want to give them a couple free engravings to offset the cost of the cup that's ruined, or if you want to buy the cup from them and get another one or whatever. That's completely up to you. My thing is I let everybody know well in advance and ahead of time that this is it. Like, this could happen. We're not gonna try to make it happen, but it can happen. If you're okay with it, then we'll do it. So different business models, you can handle it however you want. But let's see, John, what's you got here? Great info. Getting initial settings right. The best way, you have to keep adjusting your design until you get the look you want. But if that don't look right, it takes time. Tape. Yep. So tape is your friend. Not too much.
Marking the cup and doing a frame and making sure the graphic meets where you want it to is huge. I'm about to do this. I have a nice bottle that I want to grave all the way around, and I'm going to be doing this soon.
See, I haven't taken the time to dial in my UV settings yet.
And on glass, on glass, it changes. I mean, the focal point is the issue with glass on the UV.
Because it's so fine. You
Yep.
have any deviations in the glass bubbles or
All
not?
of glass, all of glass has deviation.
Yeah. So even on the chuck, like I've run into that because I've tried some glass on the chuck with my CO2 galvo, and it's not as temperamental. I've done it with glass on the UV, but I gave up because like part of it would engrave on the top of the glass, some of it would engrave on the backside of it, some of it would engrave inside the glass. I mean, and that's where dialing everything in and getting that right.
Bob's got
Um,
a good point on the screw ups and the
yeah,
material.
I always ask, especially if it's one-off stuff or stuff that the customer is providing. I always ask for a backup. Um, and it's not, and I let them know, it's not that we intend to screw anything up. It's just if we do, especially if it's something like those special order cups. I mean, it took them like 6 weeks to get them, and they got them like 3 days before they needed them, and then I had to kind of rush to get them done. So, um, but that again just comes down to your business model. If you're not comfortable, don't take the job. Like it's not worth the headache. It's not worth the stress. It's not worth the potential uh, loss of revenue. It's not worth it. So if you're not comfortable, don't take a job. If you're not comfortable with the rotary, don't take a job. Get comfortable with it, learn it, get proficient at it, and then start taking jobs. I've seen a lot of times like, hey, my laser's going to be here. I need a rotary. Which one should I get? They end up getting one and never done anything before, and they're waiting on the machine and the rotary to get there to start a job that they already promised somebody, and
Right.
they've never done it before.
Yeah. Talk
So
about.
this,
And you know what they're upset with, though? They're not upset with themselves for taking that job. They're upset with the machine, and they're upset with the software, and they're upset with the
yep,
rotary.
yep,
So, and that's, to be frank, and I might offend somebody, but that's bullshit. It's your fault. Don't take the job. Learn how to use your machine, and then you start putting out quality products.
yep. You gotta get. And that's the same way with doing flat material. You gotta get comfortable with your machine first. Know how to use it, how to manipulate it, and how to get
Yeah.
it to work in your favor.
It, if you're buying a machine and you've never touched it before, you give yourself a month. Just like any other business, you have to factor in a loss period. Well, you factor in a month of learning that thing till 2 o'clock in the morning and mastering it before you put any shit out.
Yeah,
That's the last thing that you want to do is start handing out shit or be under the gun and have to produce garbage. It's not a bright idea.
yeah, yeah. Because
Exactly. Katie, all of my friends got gifts while I was learning. That's it. I mean,
yeah,
I
and
can't tell you
I got
things left my house.
I got a cupboard full of fuck ups.
Exactly.
To put it bluntly. I mean, and don't be afraid to waste money. Yes, it sucks. Yes, it can be tough at times, especially if you're working job to job. It definitely sucks, but you have to do it. I mean, there's no way to go around it. Um,
Can you go back up a little bit? There was a
to
good question or a good. I don't remember where it was. I'm trying to look for it. Oh,
well,
Steve.
I seen
Bob.
what John was saying about graphic designers. I wanted to touch on that too, real quick.
Yeah, and
You-
then Bob said, ask the customer for extra material.
yeah, we just talked about that.
Yeah, and then Steve was asking one too.
Yeah.
Steve, you
So
know it.
a lot of things too when you're getting designs from people, and I don't know if this is going to talk to John's question or comment, but make sure that the person you're getting your files from knows how to set it up for a laser.
Yeah.
Because a lot of graphic designers work in AI, and AI has layers. And yes, it looks good. It might be black and white, but the laser is going to see every single one of those layers, and it will not come out right. So definitely make sure you get your files from somebody that knows how to design for lasers. There's plenty of them out there. Um, I use John McBride. There's Ashley something.
Williams. Yeah, Ashley.
Yeah, which I don't know if they're here in the States or if they're somewhere else, and that's just a stage name. I don't know. But either way, those two particularly are very good. They're very sought after. A lot of people use them. So just make sure you get
You're
the
not paying
designs
a lot
from the
of
right
money.
people. What's
You're
that?
not paying a lot of money. You know, to take let's say you had a Sheriff Star and you wanted to convert it to vector for lasering, that's probably going to cost you somewhere between $15 and $25.
Yeah.
That's for something that you know that you might reproduce quite often. It's well worth it.
I pass that cost on to the customer, whether I intend to use it in the future or not. I always pass it on to the customer as a fixed fee.
Right.
Even if I have the design already, if I have the design, I won't charge the full amount. I'll be like $15 versus $25. But that helps kind of front load your ability to pay for these things as you go, or if you need special things done or whatever. It kind of front loads your bank account to be able to handle that stuff when it does come up. But typically, I always pass that cost off to customers. Steve, I had a laser 4 months before I actually started doing real jobs. Everything was trial and error for family. And that's the way it is. I used to do custom furniture, and I started out building furniture for my family. And then I honed my skills, learned more and better ways to do things, and then I started selling to the public. And it's the same with lasers or anything else you're doing. You got to hone the skills. You got to know how to use the equipment and manipulate it or use it in ways that are not
There,
orthodox necessarily, but
there
are
are a lot of people like the Katies, like the Alicias, and even you and I who post and make it look really easy.
yeah.
It's intriguing and it's something cool, and there's dreams of grandeur that man, I could make so much money. And then they get it.
Yeah.
And then it's a whole different world. You
Yeah.
got to learn, and just like a violinist learns how to play the violin, they don't go out there and do a symphony right away. You got to learn the shit.
And you also got to remember too is when you're on Facebook and social media and you see all these posts, 95% of the time you're going to see the good end product. You're not going to see all the
The
scrap.
bots and stuff tumblers.
You're not going to see all the junk.
Right.
So don't get discouraged especially don't take. I mean, take information from people as far as like settings, power, speed, things like that, but don't and don't trust them as like the gospel. Don't think, oh well, if it doesn't work for me, something's wrong with the machine or whatever. Every machine, like Chris has got, was a 51
63, yeah.
or 63. Like I have a 63. I can almost guarantee you, our rotary settings for our 63s are very close, but I almost guarantee you they're not the same.
Well, I mean,
Um,
for example, I can look over right now and I have 120 volts of AC power coming into my shop. Do you have, we're kind of guaranteed from the power company 110. It should be 110, right? It's 110 equipment. But I have 120. Do you have 124? Do you have, 111? That plays a role. Humidity in my shop in Florida may be very different than somebody in Michigan.
Yep. Let's see. Yeah, well, speaking of humidity, that plays a lot into how the machine operates, how efficient it is, also temperature. If you're in a climate controlled like myself, Chris, I know is not necessarily.
I am.
Yeah. Um, so all that stuff plays into how the machine actually performs. So there's a lot of variables that can dictate the settings of the machine. That's what I'm saying. My 63 probably runs different settings than his for similar or the same job or type job, just based on our differences in how we keep our machines. Um, so take that information for what it's worth, but try it. If it don't work, tweak it a little bit. And learning how to tweak it and what to tweak, speed, power, you got to offset those. You can't raise both of them at the same time. You can't lower them both at the same time. You have to have a trade-off there with speed and power. Oh, you got AC. Oh, you got
Yeah,
AC in there now.
I've got AC and insulation.
Oh, there you
But
go.
it does. I have 3 roll-up 10 by 10 roll-up doors, so there's gaps in there, and there's humidity, and it is temperature controlled. But yeah, there was many times that there was a year that I had this building, no AC, no insulation, It was 120-degree wall temperature. I was sitting in that corner back there, sweating my ass off, just typing.
I did that when I was running out of my home shop. I did that for about 3 months, and I was like, no, screw this. So I got a 4-ton air conditioning unit in a 900 square foot building. That thing, it cools it off quick, and I got dehumidifier running all the time.
Yeah, me too.
So I mean, you got to take the steps to protect your equipment. More so, it is nice to have that comfort, but it should be more geared about the machine's comfort, so to speak. Because if you're not taking care of your machine, keeping it dry, keeping it cool, keeping the humidity away, the machine, it's going to rust, it's going to deteriorate. Lenses are going to get damaged. And that's where Alicia was talking about air dryers and things like that, because we've seen a lot of posts lately about people, hey, I upgraded my air to external air. Why am I getting water? Again, that's going to depend on where you live. If you live in Arizona in the desert or Utah or something like that, you may not have that problem. But in Texas, Florida, Louisiana, all the southern states per se, you're going to have a lot more issues with that. A good air dryer, like I think Alicia, I have one that cost me like $1,400, but it's a 40 CFM. It can handle up to 40 CFM. You can get one that handles like 20 for like $600 from Harbor Freight. I think Alicia had one of those, or still does. And it's a good insurance policy. Like
there's no reason why you can't have two. Daisy chain it.
Yeah, I mean, like my system, and I actually have a video on my setup if anybody's interested on the Rotoboss YouTube. But mine, I have a pre-filter, which is a canister, and then I have the air dryer, which is a refrigerated air dryer, and then I have a post filter after that, so I can run that thing all day long and not get a drop of water, because the air dryer purges itself when it gets water in it. It'll self purge. If you want to go an extra step, you can add an air dryer right at the machine before it goes into the laser. But if you do that, make sure you get an auto drain, or you keep an eye on it, because if it fills up, guess what? That water's gonna get out of there and go into your laser. So you got to keep up on maintenance with that kind of stuff. Yeah, 30K in your garage. Yeah. I've got. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you got 30K worth of equipment in your garage, $500, $1,000 is damn good insurance, and there's no reason not to do it, because those puny little air dryers, especially if you're in a high humidity environment, they're not rated to handle that much volume. So if you're pumping 40, 50 psi through those things, they're going to fill up quick. And even if they don't fill up, all that air pressure circulating that water that gets separated can eventually spill over and get back into your system and damage your laser, damage your lenses, things like that. Basics, power and air setup affect your work. Try to stay with dedicated sources. Yeah, so if you have a lot of equipment running, like mine, I have 2 dedicated lines just to the lasers, and then I have a dedicated line to my air dryer, and my air compressor's 220, so it's dedicated on its own. But you want to make sure that you're dedicating a circuit to your laser, particularly because if you're running a compressor and your laser off the same circuit, when that compressor kicks on, it's going to pull power from the laser. So if you're in the middle of a job, you're going to see like faint areas where it's not engraving as well, and then as soon as you get all that power back, it's going to leave you a dark line in the material, because of the power fluctuation coming off that one circuit that's running the laser's not really that high a demand, but if you have a compressor, obviously it's pulling 10 to 12 amps probably on startup, and if you're only running on a 15 amp circuit or maybe even a 20 amp circuit, you're cutting the power by 2/3 every time that kicks on, which will affect your laser and will affect the performance and output of the laser on your material.
Absolutely.
Yeah, mini splits are good ideas. One thing, and again, we're getting off the rotary stuff, but anyways, mini splits are okay. Window units are okay. Central air, like what Chris and I have in our shops, are good. the one thing you want to try to avoid, especially if you're in a high humidity area, is getting one of those portable AC units, because it's basically just turning over air. It's pulling air from the outside and it's expelling it out. So you're basically doing a constant transfer, because a lot of people are like, well, I got an AC unit, but I can't keep it cool in here. It stays
Right.
hot. It's because you're basically pulling in fresh, humid, hot air from outside or cold air in the winter, and it's going through the machine. 50% of it's getting blown back into the room. 50% of it's getting exhausted back outside. So it's a constant turnover of air, whereas central air or a mini split or a window unit or something like that is basically just recirculating the air that's in the room, so you're not losing that air. And then on top of that, when you have a laser or multiple lasers running, that's even more air that you're pulling into the shop and exhausting out the shop.
Yeah, people
So
factor that in. Like,
yep.
how much CFM are you pulling with the machine?
Yeah, because I mean every machine, at least I think a 63 is pulling what, 4 to 500 CFM.
The at least the larger Nova series run an 8-inch exhaust that's over 700.
700. Okay, so you got
I
700.
I run a 10-inch exhaust, so I'm just sucking that air right out.
Yeah, I've got a 14-inch trunk and then drops off of it. But so you got to think. Let's say the fan's pulling 700 CFM for the laser. Then you got a portable AC unit, which is pulling probably 3 to 400, depending on the size of it, maybe a little bit more. So that's 12, 1300 CFM that you're drawing into the shop, as well as sending it out of the shop. Um, so, and with all that, making sure you have dampers and all that stuff too, is key, because especially in the wintertime or even in the summertime, if you have an air conditioned space and you shut everything down and you don't have dampers, you're going to get an air exchange. And when that air exchange happens, where's it happening at? Inside your laser. So where's all that condensation going to collect and start? In your laser. I know before I learned all this back years and years ago, I would come out, and I had a Boss laser at the time, and I come out and water was literally dripping off the machine. I had puddles of water on the ground underneath the machine. I open up the machine, it's just covered in water. Because I use one of them little flapper valves. I didn't actually put a like a, whatever you call it, butterfly damper or something in there, so the air was still able to get in, and it would condense in the laser, because that's the first place it's going, is into the laser. Um, yeah, leaving lit up at night is a good idea. I don't do that. I leave all my lids down, because I have a damper on the main line, and I also have dampers on each individual drop that are electric, so they close against a rubber seal. So I don't really worry about that. I haven't had any issues. Plus, I have an industrial dehumidifier, because my shop's like 2,000 square foot. So I have one of them industrial dehumidifiers that runs all the time, and it just self drains, and it keeps the humidity about 40%. Um, so I don't worry about that too much. But again, that was like a $3,000 dehumidifier. But when I've got $100,000+ worth of equipment sitting in my shop, that's nothing. I mean,
9:30, homie.
yeah, I know. I'm having fun. The people are still here, so
My family wants to see me, I'm sure.
well, we can get off here in a bit. House of Lasers, you got it. Going to have to hire you guys to build my perfect shop someday. I don't want to have to learn all this. Yeah,
It's a lot. It's a lot to build a shop, especially from scratch.
yeah. Luckily, my shop, when I got it, it had two holes with big exhaust fans. Because it wasn't insulated, it wasn't air conditioned, it was just an open warehouse. So they use those fans to circulate air through. Well, I took one of them, took the fan out, put a plate up, and then ducted my 14-inch trunk line into that. So it's got the built-in louvers, it's got the big old hood outside with the grates, the birds and all that crap can't get in there. So fortunately, I had that already there. But also just making sure and set up to expand. Don't be afraid to put in a 10-inch line, even if you're only using one laser. if you think you're going to get more, it's better to be ready. And all you got to do is cut a hole in your trunk, drop another drop to your laser, and you're good.
And don't let
You're
them
usually,
run PVC.
what's that?
And don't let them run PVC.
Yeah. I mean, you can run PVC, but you need to make sure you ground it. Like when I had it in my home shop, I had 6-inch PVC, but I had sheet metal screws screwed into it that were like 1.5 inches long, and then I ran a grounding wire from that bolt to the frame of the building to actually ground it. Because what he's getting at with it is you can cause a fire because it builds up static and all that debris and soot and stuff inside the pipe. It just takes a spark and you can ignite that. Whereas if you ground it a couple times throughout the system with PVC, you can do it on the cheap. I wouldn't recommend it.
No,
but
throw metal duct in there.
In a pinch, I mean, you can get a 5-foot piece of metal ducting for like $6 to $10, I think, depending on the size. The snap together kind that you just fold and kind of snap together. Let's see. Mind blown. Yeah, a lot of information. I mean, this is off the topic of the original thing, but we're after time, so just kind of answering questions as we go. We're gonna wrap this up though. Chris has got to go pull daddy duty and everything. So if anybody has any last minute questions while we're kind of wrapping this up, throw them up there, and we'll see if we can get to them. If not, leave us a comment or something in the chat, and we'll try to address it in our next video. Yeah, thanks for coming, Katie. It's always good to have you.
Good.
Like I said,
you.
Yeah, I summoned her by talking about her so much earlier on. But yeah, great source of information there. Robert Kofed, great source of information as well. Again, Chris has some great information. I have some good information, and none of us are necessarily wrong about it. We all have our own ways of doing it based on our experience, and that's something that you'll gain as you progress as a maker in this space. You'll learn your own habits, what works for you, little tricks and things like that. We're just trying to give you kind of our perspective on things to maybe give you a somewhat of a starting point.
Yeah, it's all about workflow and what's profitable and most efficient, and what works for you is the best. I mean, that's it. Nobody can decide that.
As long as it works, it's not wrong. I mean, people might argue like Chris thinks I'm wrong. I think he's wrong, but but as long as it gets the job done, I mean, there's no wrong way to do it. Yeah, so I think we're gonna go and hop off here. I don't know, Chris, you got any?
No, I appreciate everybody joining. Looks like the crowds are getting a little bit larger and larger each time, so that's awesome. But yeah, I'm glad people are joining.
Awesome, guys. Well, I thank every one of you for coming out, all the questions and everything. Hopefully we answered the majority of them as best we could, and hopefully the information that we had earlier in this at the beginning of this and through the first hour, hopefully it was helpful. I just wanted to kind of brush the surface. It wasn't in no way meant to be like a complete tutorial, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight on how to set things up. And if you guys have any questions at all, I'm here to help, whether you have my rotary or somebody else's, or you have laser questions, things like that. I'm always here to help.
All right, Jason. No matter what anybody says, you're all right.
Yeah, I try. I'm glad somebody notices. So again, thanks everybody for coming out. Look forward to our next episodes coming out. I know in June we're going to be getting with Joey Spanner from Light Burn. We're going to try to get Adam because of the time difference. It probably is not going to work because he's in, I think, Switzerland. But we're going to definitely have Joey in here from Light Burn to discuss Light Burn specific stuff here in June. I don't have a date exactly yet. I'm waiting to get our schedules together. But I'll let you know. I'll let you know, Chris, once we figure that out and get the date and times. And then we'll post on it. We plan on getting a bunch of other people. So if you'd like to see any makers out there or any people that you see as experts or anything like that, please let us know. Again, we're trying to kind of touch on things that other podcasts and things don't touch on. So if you have anything, just let us know, and we'll try to get to them as best as soon as we can. So if that's all we got, then again, thanks for joining us. Look forward to seeing you in the next episode. I hope you guys have a wonderful night, and we will see you in the next episode of the Turn and Burn podcast. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night. Good night, Jason.